So, in June 2013, a high school graduation in Pickens County, South Carolina, became an unexpected flashpoint in America's ongoing debate over faith in public education. At Liberty High School, valedictorian Roy Costner IV stepped to the podium with a school-approved speech, prepared after recent legal challenges. Moments into his remarks, he paused, tore the paper in half, and began reciting the Lord's Prayer. The audience erupted. You couldn't even hear him anymore because everybody was clapping and cheering, one witness recalled. For many in the auditorium, this moment felt like the restoration of something meaningful. For others, it raised deep constitutional questions. Overnight, a local graduation became a national symbol of tension between cultural expectations and constitutional limits. This project asks a central question. Why does South Carolina continue to support visible Christian expression in its public schools, even after decades of Supreme Court decisions restricting school-sponsored prayer and other devotional practices? To answer this, we consider four strands: history, culture, constitutional law, and theology. My argument is that South Carolina's civic culture, shaped by evangelical identity, biblical nationalism, and regional memory, continues to reinterpret First Amendment boundaries in ways that preserve visible Christian expression in public schools. South Carolina is not rejecting constitutional authority. Instead, communities and lawmakers work within federal restrictions while preserving public expressions of faith that feel inseparable from regional identity. Southern historians such as Christine Leigh Harriman, Donald Matthews, Paul Harvey, Aaron Shalov, Mark Knoll, and John Wigger showed that evangelical Christianity is not just a belief system in the South. It is a cultural inheritance. Christine Harriman's Southern Cross shows that evangelicalism entered the early South as a disruptive religious movement, challenging hierarchies and social structures and moral norms. As she notes, it introduced a, quote, a new moral order, end quote. But over time, evangelicalism adapted to Southern expectations, eventually shaping mainstream cultural identity. Her findings explain why Southern communities often perceive public expressions of faith as cultural continuity rather than religious imposition. Donald Matthews, Religion in the Old South, adds that religious institutions help define public expectations about morality, authority, and social order. In the antebellum era, churches shaped civic life, and those patterns did not simply vanish after the Civil War. Matthews helps explain why South Carolina communities still interpret religious expression as a public good, not merely a private act. Paul Harvey's Freedom's Coming shows how religion shaped the modern South by influencing racial, political, and civic identities. His work clarifies why conflicts over school prayer and religious expression endure in the present day. They reflect deep memory, not merely policy disagreements, because as Harvey writes, quote, religion marked public life, end quote. Aaron Shalov's American Zion adds an important layer by showing how Americans have historically identified themselves as New Israel, using Old Testament language to describe national purpose, civic identity, and moral vision. The biblical nationalism continues to inform how many South Carolinians view faith, virtue, and civic life. Shalab's insights are essential for understanding South Carolina. Its citizens view their community through a framework that blends faith, heritage, and national destiny. Then public expression of Christianity in schools are not departures from civic norms. They are the norms. Mark Noll's work on American political theology, particularly in Americanism's God, shows how Protestant thought shaped ideas of Republican citizenship. He links Republican ideals with biblical language, creating a civic religious vocabulary that blurred boundaries between faith and public life, producing what he calls, quote, a fusion of theology and republicanism, end quote. For many Americans, and especially Southern communities, public expressions of Christian identity have long been intertwined with the meaning of citizenship itself. In South Carolina, this connection between faith and civic duty continues to inform expectations about public education. Together, Shalab and Noll show how biblical language has long shaped American civic identity, making it natural for communities to view public expression of faith as part of their political culture. John Wigger's Taking Heaven by Storm explains why expressive, emotional, and public forms of Christianity become so deeply rooted in American culture. His insights illuminate why visible religious practices, testimonies, prayers, displays of devotion, and emotional witness are embedded in American culture. They feel natural to the public. Settings in many parts of the South. His insights clarify why student-led expressions like Costner's are seen as authentic, normal, rather than disruptive expressions of faith. In summation, these historians show that the school prayer debate is not just legal. It is rooted in Southern religious culture, identity, and memory. In the 1962 Engel versus Vitale case, the Supreme Court opined that state-sponsored prayer, even non-denominational prayer, violates the Establishment Clause. A year later, in the Abington-Schlepp case, devotional biblical reading were declared unconstitutional, even if voluntarily. Schools may not promote or appear to endorse religious activity. 18 years later, the 1980 Stone versus Graham case opined that posting the Ten Commandments in classrooms became impermissible. They lacked a valid secular pause. These cases established a national baseline, but interpretations differ sharply in South Carolina. These rulings collided with long-standing religious expectations. The 2011 Anderson versus Chesterfield County School District case revealed that teachers and administrators still led prayers and devotionals in some districts. When challenged, many families felt something essential was being taken away. The results: statewide compliance tightened. Teachers and administrators avoided devotionals or religious activity. Administrators avoided religious references, and student speeches were scrutinized. This reduction in visible faith created cultural friction, experienced as loss, not neutrality. When Roy Costner prayed at his graduation, the community viewed it not as defiance, but as reaffirmation of tradition. Media outlets framed it as civil disobedience. Legislatures framed it as a stand for religious liberty, whereas community leaders framed it as cultural continuity. In response, lawmakers introduced Religious Viewpoints Anti-Discrimination Acts in 2017 and 2025. The goal was to reframe religious expression as student speech, not as state endorsement speech. Under these bills, students may express religious views on equal terms with secular views. Schools may not suppress voluntary religious expression. Student speakers chosen by neutral processes may include religious content. This aligns with Shalov's insight. Public expressions of Christianity are seen as civic inheritance. Jeffrey Tucker, Brownstone Institute founder and senior economics editor for the Epoch Times, argues that American freedom rests on three things: heritage, individual rights, and religious conviction. Faith provides a moral framework that fosters responsibility, ethical behavior, and resistance to coercion. For many South Carolinians, reducing visible religious expression feels like the erosion of a moral and civic inheritance, not simply a legal adjustment. At the national level, senior South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, a Pickens County native like Costner, reflects this cultural logic. His 2025 press release recognizing Religious Education Week framed voluntary faith instruction as character-forming and civically meaningful. His statements articulate, rather than redefine, long-standing regional expectations. From a theological lens or viewpoint, in Matthew 6, Jesus warns against performative public piety, echoing constitutional concerns about government-directed devotion. However, in 1 Peter 3:15, believers are encouraged to give testimony with gentleness and respect, emphasizing sincerity and voluntary expression. Many South Carolinians interpret constitutional boundaries as protecting sincere faith, not restricting it. Public expressions of faith, prayers, invocations, shared moments, function as markers of identity. When restricted, South Carolinian communities often feel cultural displacement rather than legal correction. South Carolina does not reject Supreme Court limits. Instead, it operates within them while preserving practices seen as cultural inheritance. Voluntary expressions of faith are understood as markers of civic virtue, personal conviction, and community identity. In conclusion, these historical, cultural, legal, and theological threads explain why debates over religious expression persist today. South Carolina navigates a narrow space between constitutional boundaries and cultural expectations, preserving traditions viewed as central to civic and religious identity. Costner's 2013 prayer and ongoing legislative efforts reflect more than isolated events. They reveal a regional commitment to maintaining a public culture where religious expression remains visible, voluntary, and meaningful. For many South Carolinians, faith is not merely private, but a form of civic identity, shaping how communities understand responsibility, belonging, and the common good. Thank you.